Her father sold her for a sack of flour and 2 candles on the coldest night of the year. The door, that's the thing I keep coming back to. It wasn't much of a door. Pine planks I'd cut myself the winter before, tongue and groove badly done because I was rushing and my hands were half frozen when I fitted it. There was a gap at the bottom you could slide 2 fingers under on a calm day, and when the wind came out of the north, it moved the whole frame a little, just a shiver. I'd meant to fix it every fall for 4 years and never had. A man living alone gets used to things being the way they are and stops seeing them. I heard her knock on it before I heard anything else. Before I heard her father out there, before I heard the horse blowing or the creak of the wagon. Just 3 knocks, deliberate, not scared, not frantic, just 3 knocks like she had every right in the world to be standing there on my porch in the dark. That was the first thing I learned about her. I need to tell you about that winter first because it matters. It was 1887, the worst one the Northern Territories had seen in living memory. Old-timers called it the White Winter later, but we weren't calling it anything yet that November because we didn't know how bad it was going to get. We just knew the first freeze had come 3 weeks early, and the sky had that low, gray iron look that settles in like a lid on a pot. I had a claim east of the Sweetwater, 160 acres of mixed grass and creek bottom that I'd been working alone for 6 years. Before that, I'd spent 12 years as a deputy in 2 different counties, and before that, I'd done things I don't talk about anymore. I was 51 years old and I lived by myself because I had chosen to and because no one had given me particular reason to choose otherwise. I had a dog named Cass who was 11 and slept by the stove. I had 11 head of cattle and 4 horses and a mule named Porter. I had a root cellar that was well stocked and a woodpile that was large enough and a rifle that was clean. That was the whole of it. The nearest town was Hatchet Creek, 14 miles west. I went in twice a month for mail and supplies and came back the same day. People there knew me as a man who paid his accounts, spoke when he needed to, and didn't stay for conversation. I don't think most of them would have known my first name. That was how I wanted it. I'd had enough of people by then, their debts and their politics and their small cruelties, and I'd found that cattle and silence suited me better than anything I'd tried before. That's who I was the night she knocked. November 14th. I remember it exactly because I'd just finished tallying what I had put by and I was satisfied, not comfortable. A man doesn't get comfortable in that country, but I could see my way through to spring and that was enough. I had the lamp burning on the table and Cass was stretched out near the stove and it was maybe 8 o'clock and I was thinking about going to bed. 3 knocks. I took the rifle off the wall, not panicked, just practical, and I went to the door and opened it. The cold came in first, real cold, the kind that has weight to it, and then I saw her. She was young. I thought maybe 16, maybe 17. I found out later she'd turned 18 that October. She was wearing a wool coat that was 1 size too large and a shawl on top of it, and she had no hat and her dark hair was coming loose from where she'd pinned it, and her face was, I don't know exactly how to say this, her face was steady. That's the word. She wasn't crying and she wasn't shaking and she wasn't looking at me with the soft, desperate eyes of someone who needs rescuing. She was looking at me the way a person looks at a door. They've decided to open regardless of what's behind it. "Mr. Callum," she said, "my name is Ada Priest, my father's in the wagon." I looked past her. There was a farm wagon about 20 yards out, a mule in the traces, and a man sitting on the board who didn't turn to look at me. "What does he want?" I said. "He wants to go home," she said. "He's already been paid." I'm going to tell you what happened in the next 10 minutes plainly, because it's the kind of thing that sounds impossible if you dress it up, and I want you to understand it actually happened. Her father's name was Henry Priest. He had a quarter section 12 miles north of me, bad land, rocky, poor drainage, and he had worked it badly besides. He had a wife who died 2 winters back and 4 children younger than Ada, and a debt at the Hatchet Creek Mercantile that had gone from bad to worse to something Eustace Darman, who ran the store, was no longer patient about. At some point in the weeks prior, I didn't know any of this, Eustace Darman had made Henry Priest a proposition. Darman was 58, a widower, and he had made inquiries about Ada before, which her father had brushed off because Ada herself had made her opinion clear. But a man with 4 hungry children and a debt he can't pay stops hearing his daughter's opinions after a while. Darman, as it turned out, didn't want Ada as his wife. He wanted her as something less than that, and I won't say it plainer than that because what I mean is plain enough. He'd put up the store credit, a sack of flour, 2 tallow candles, and the debt marked down by a third. And Priest had agreed. And that night Priest had driven his daughter the 12 miles south to Darman's house, and Ada had walked through Darman's front door, and within 90 seconds understood exactly what she had been brought there for, and had walked back out the other side and kept going. She had no horse. She walked in the dark and the cold for 2 hours until she reached the road that went past my property, and she came to my door because she knew I had been a deputy, and because she did not know where else to go. Her father had followed her at a distance in the wagon, but he had not stopped her, and he had not called her back. He had let her walk in front of him in the dark for 2 hours, and then he had pulled up when she turned onto my road. That was all I needed to know. I went down off the porch and I walked out to the wagon and I looked up at Henry Priest. He was a gaunt man, 50-ish, with a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months and eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. I said right out. He started to say something, I don't know what, some piece of explaining or bargaining or blaming, and I said it again. Just those 2 words. I had a certain way of saying things when I needed to from my years of work, and he heard it. He rode out. Ada was standing at the bottom of my porch steps when I turned around. She was watching the wagon go. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I know you don't know me. Come inside, I said. You need to get warm. I gave her coffee and I fed Cass, and I put a bedroll in the back room which I used for storage, and I told her she was safe and she could sleep. She thanked me plainly, without making too much of it, which was its own kind of grace. She was not the kind of person who fills silence when silence will do. I sat at my table for a long time after the lamp in the back room went out. I was thinking about what had to be done and in what order. The first thing was this: she had nowhere to go. Her father's house was 12 miles north and was no longer safe for her, that much was clear. She had no other family within 100 miles that I knew of, and even if she did, it was November and cold, and it would only get colder, and she was a woman alone in country that was not kind to women alone. The second thing was this: Eustace Darman was going to want what he considered his, or at least the restoration of what he'd paid. Men like Darman don't let things go. The third thing, and this was the thing that sat on me the heaviest, was that whatever I did in the next few days was going to decide what kind of man I still was, or what was left of one. I'd like to tell you I made some kind of speech about it to Cass or to myself. I didn't. I just sat there until my coffee was cold and then I went to bed. In the morning, she was up before me. That surprised me. I had not slept soundly, kept half listening for sounds outside, and I would have said I was up at first light. But when I came out of my bedroom, she had the stove going and the coffee on, and she was standing at my kitchen window looking out at the yard. You don't have to do that, I said. I know, she said. She handed me a cup. What are we going to do? I noticed that. Not what are you going to do or what should I do? Like she had already decided she was in this alongside me, whatever it was. I'm going to ride to town today, I said. There are some things that need settling. About Darman? Yes. She turned and looked at me straight. Brown eyes, not soft, clear and direct, the way I've described her face on the porch. He's going to be ugly about it, she said. He's not a man who loses gracefully. I've dealt with men like him before. I know, she said again. That's why I came here. I didn't say anything to that. I drank my coffee and she went and sat down at the table and we didn't talk for a while, which was fine by both of us. Hatchet Creek in November. I've ridden that road enough times that I stopped seeing it years ago, but that morning I was seeing it. The grass on both sides bent low with frost, and the sky was the same gray iron as the day before, and the cold had a particular quality to it, clean and still, the kind that makes every sound carry farther than it should. I could hear my horse's hooves for a long time after I'd have expected to stop. I want to tell you who Eustace Darman was, because I don't want you thinking this was simpler than it was. He'd come to Hatchet Creek 12 years before with a little capital and a lot of patience, and he'd built his store up carefully and extended credit the way a man extends a rope, just long enough to hang you. By 1887, he held paper on 6 farms in that district. He was not liked, but he was needed, and in small settlements those 2 things are enough to make a man nearly untouchable. He sat on the town council. He had 2 men who worked for him, a big quiet one named Hollies and a younger one named Cask who had a mean mouth and small eyes. And those two men served a variety of functions that went somewhat beyond stocking shelves. I had bought supplies from Darman's store for 4 years. We had exchanged maybe 40 words in that time. I had noticed his particular way of watching the younger women who came in, but I had done what a man living alone does with things he can't change. I had noticed it and filed it away and moved on. That morning, I was not moving on. He was behind the counter when I came in. Holly's was sweeping near the back. Cask wasn't visible. Callum, Darman said. He had a round face, well-fed, and a way of smiling that didn't reach anything. Cold morning. It is, I said. I stopped in front of the counter. Ada Priest is at my place. The smile didn't change, is she? She's going to stay there until I find her a better situation. She's not going north, and she's not going to your house. He put both hands flat on the counter. Now I think there's a misunderstanding here, he said in his careful, reasonable voice. Henry and I had a private arrangement. I know what the arrangement was, I said, and I know what the law says about it in this territory, which is more than Henry Priest knew when he agreed to it. That was true. What Darman had arranged was not legal in any terms I could put a clean name to, and I had arrived at this conversation having thought through exactly how I wanted to say that. You're going to mark his debt as paid, in full, and you're going to leave that girl alone. Darman's smile was gone now. You're not a deputy anymore, Callum. No, I said. I'm not. I let that sit for a moment. Which means when I ride to the county seat, I'm not representing this town. I'm representing myself, and I'll say whatever I please to whoever I find there. And I'll find someone, I know people there, some of them in positions to make your life complicated, and I'll be specific. He was quiet. I could hear Holly's had stopped sweeping. This is business between me and Henry Priest, Darman said. I said. It's settled now. You're paid in full or you explain yourself to the county. I won't pretend it went that clean at every stage. Cask came out from the back room sometime in that conversation and stood near the door, and I knew what that was. I'd spent 12 years reading those kinds of arrangements. I kept my eyes on Darman, and I let Cask know, without looking at him, that I'd marked him, and it didn't change anything. What finally moved Darman was not my speech. Men like him don't move on words alone. It was something simpler. It was that I was unmoved. He was used to men who wanted something from him, their credit, their debt forgiven, their favor, and he knew how to use that wanting. I didn't want anything from him. I had enough to eat and enough wood, and my accounts were square, and I had never needed him. And when a man like Darman realizes the person across from him genuinely does not need anything he has fewer tools. He marked the priest's debt paid. I watched him do it in his ledger. Then I bought a 20-pound sack of flour because I needed flour, and I tied it to my saddle and rode home. Here's what those first weeks were. She made herself useful, which I had not asked her to and would not have. It was her nature. She had grown up keeping a household together, 4 children, a farm, a mother who was sick before she died, and she moved through work the way water moves through level ground, just following the course that needs following. She fixed the gap under my door. She did it on the 3rd day without mentioning it, just found some scrap wood in the storage room and worked it until it fit and set it flush and came in for dinner. I looked at the door and I didn't say anything and she didn't say anything. But I noticed it. She was good with Cass, who was old and stiff and suspicious of most people. He went to her on the 4th day, which surprised me, because it usually took Cass months to make up his mind about anyone. She didn't make a fuss about it. She just let him put his head in her lap and scratched his ears and went back to whatever she was reading. I had 3 shelves of books, which she'd taken note of immediately. I want to be careful about how I tell this part, because I know what it sounds like, and I want you to hear what it actually was. I was not lonely. I want to say that plainly. I had chosen the life I had, and I was not pining for it to be different. But there is a particular quality to a house when another person is in it, a sound in the other room, a dish in the drying rack that is not yours, the knowledge that someone will be awake when you come in, and I had forgotten that quality. I had not missed it because I had forgotten it. It came back to me in pieces that first week. The specific quiet of a house that has someone in it rather than the specific quiet of a house that doesn't. Those are 2 different kinds of quiet, and I had spent so long with one that I'd forgotten the other existed. Ada did not fill the silence with chatter. She spoke when she had something to say, and when she didn't, she was comfortable with the room the way it was. That alone was more than I could have asked for. She was also, I found out, sharp as a new blade about a lot of things. The fourth or fifth evening, the snow had started by then, light still, a dusting. She looked up from her book and said, "You were a deputy for 12 years and you're 51, which means you started young. Were you in the war before that?" "No," I said. "I was 14 when it ended." "But you did something before the law work." I looked at her. "Why do you ask?" "Because you move like a man who learned to read a room before he learned to read a page," she said. "And because when you came back from town that day you were calm, and I don't think most men would have been calm." She went back to her book. She had said what she had to say and wasn't asking for more. I thought about that for a while. Finally, I said, "I worked cattle drives out of Texas. 12 years as a trail hand, then 7 more as a foreman. Then I killed a man in Abilene who needed killing, and the town made me a deputy to keep things tidy, and it turned out I was good at it." She nodded like that confirmed something she'd already half figured. "Did you ever want to go back to the drives?" "No." "Why not?" "Because by the end of the drives, I'd seen too much of what men do to each other when there's no one watching," I said. "The law, at least, is someone watching." She thought about that then and now. "Now I watch my own 80 acres, I said. "It's enough." She looked at me not unkindly. "Is it?" I didn't answer that. I got up and put more wood on the fire, and she went back to her book, and that was the end of it. But it stayed with me, that question. Sat with me the way a pebble in a boot sits, not exactly pain, but present. The snow thickened through late November. By the first week of December, it was coming sideways on most days, and the temperature had dropped to places I'd only seen once or twice before. I kept the cattle close and the horses in. Porter the mule could have stood outdoors in a blizzard and been fine, but I brought him in anyway. Ada had written to a woman in Casper, a friend of her mother's, she said, a woman named Mrs. Calloway who was known to take in boarders. She had written before the worst of the snow. We were waiting to hear back. I want to tell you I was thinking about that letter practically, that I was focused on finding Ada a good situation, getting her settled, doing the right thing. I was thinking about it that way. But I was also thinking about it another way that I didn't fully admit to myself at the time, which was, I was in no particular hurry for an answer to arrive. That's the truth of it. I am telling you the truth of it. Cask showed up on a Thursday in the second week of December. I was in the barn when I heard him ride up. I came out, and he was sitting on a gray horse at the edge of my yard, and he had his collar up against the cold, and he wasn't smiling. "Darman wants to talk," he said. "He knows where I live," I said. "He wants you to come to town." "Tell him I'll be in for supplies before Christmas," I said. "He can talk to me then." Cask looked at the house. I watched him do it. "The girl's still here," he said. I didn't answer that. I just looked at him the way I used to look at men who were considering their options. He rode out, slowly, which was meant to tell me something about how he felt about it. I went inside and I told Ada. She listened, her hands still, her face that same steady look. "He's going to do something," she said. "Probably." "Can you," she stopped, started again. "Can he cause you real trouble legally?" "He can try," I said. "He doesn't have much to work with." "What about the other kind of trouble?" I looked at her. She was not asking me to reassure her. She was asking me to be straight with her, and she had a right to that. "Two men," I said. "Holly's is big and not quick and does what he's told. Cask is the one to watch. He's the kind who comes at night." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father had a shotgun he left in the wagon that night. I took it before I got out." I stared at her. "You have been carrying a shotgun around this whole time." "It's under my bed," she said without any particular expression. "I thought you might want to know about it." I won't say I laughed, but something close to it moved through me. "Yes," I said, "I did want to know about that." Nothing happened the next 2 nights. The cold got worse, 40 below on the second night, which I have not felt since and hope not to feel again. The cattle came through, mostly because I went out every 4 hours and checked them and moved them when I needed to. Ada stayed up with me the first night, sitting at the table with coffee, and when I came in at midnight she had food ready, and when I went out at 4 she was still up. I told her she didn't need to do that. "You're not going to tell me to go to sleep," she said. "I'm not your father," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "No," she said, "you're not." The third night Cask came. I heard him, or I heard something, a sound at the edge of the property that was wrong. Cass heard it first. He raised his head from the floor by the stove and his hackles went up, and he made a sound low in his chest that wasn't quite a growl. I was already up and had the rifle. Ada was out of the back room in 30 seconds with the shotgun, barefoot on the cold floor, her hair loose around her shoulders. She came to stand beside me without me asking and without saying anything. I looked at her, she looked at me. We stood there in the dark of the main room, not moving, listening. 2 sounds outside, one near the barn, one nearer to the house. I said, very quiet, "The barn one is Holly's, go to the window on the west side." She went. I went to the door and I opened it, and I stepped out onto the porch. Cask was 7 feet away, just outside the ring of light from the window. "Cold night for a ride," I said. He had a gun, but he hadn't raised it. He'd expected me to be asleep. He was calculating now, in the fast, unpleasant way men calculate when something has gone sideways. "Darman wants the girl," he said. "She's not here," I said. "We saw smoke." "I have a dog," I said. "He likes the fire." A beat, he was looking at me trying to read me, and I was giving him a clean, flat surface to read, nothing on it. Then from the west side of the house, very calm, Ada's voice. "If the man near my barn takes one more step, I'm going to fire this shotgun through this window." Cask's eyes moved. "She means it," I said. Silence, long enough that the cold was getting into my feet through my boots. The wind had stopped, which was the only mercy, and in the stillness I could hear Holly's horse shifting its weight near the barn and nothing else. Cask made a sound, half disgust, half a thing I won't name, and then he turned his horse and rode out, and Holly's, after a moment, did the same. I waited until I couldn't hear hooves anymore. Then I went inside. Ada was still at the window, the shotgun lowered now, her breath making small clouds in the cold air coming through the glass. She turned when she heard me come in. "Holly's had already started toward the barn door," she said. "Another step and I'd have gone through the wall." "I believe you," I said. She put the shotgun down on the table. Her hands, I noticed, were steady. "Is it done?" she said. "For tonight," I said. "In the morning I'm going to Darman." I went to Darman the next morning before he'd opened his store. I knocked on his private door at the back of the building, and he opened it in his robe. And I told him what had happened. And I told him that Cask and Holly's had come to my property in the night. And I told him that I had a very clear picture of what had been paid to Henry Priest, and for what purpose. And I was going to write it down on paper, and I was going to send copies to 3 different people I trusted in the county and beyond. And if anything happened to Ada Priest or to me, those letters would be opened. I was not angry when I said it. I had stopped being angry sometime in the cold on my porch the night before, and what I was now was simply certain. Darman looked at me for a long time. He was a man who understood leverage. It was the only language he fully trusted, and he was reading now whether I was telling him the truth. I was. "This is finished," I said. "You'll leave her alone and you'll leave me alone, and in the spring you can sell your store and go somewhere else if you'd like, or you can stay and we'll have nothing more to say to each other. Either way, but you're done." He closed the door. I rode home. 2 days before Christmas, the letter came from Casper. Ada read it at the table, and I watched her face. Mrs. Calloway, it turned out, had died in October. The woman who'd written back was a niece who was already overwhelmed and had no room. Ada folded the letter and set it down flat on the table. She sat with it for a while. Outside the window the snow was coming again, the thick particular kind that settles in to stay. "I'll write somewhere else," she said. Her voice was even. "There are situations in towns, school teachers are needed." "You'd need to wait until spring to travel," I said. "I know that." I sat down across from her. Cass came and put his head on my knee, and I put my hand on him. "Ada," I said. She looked up. "There are things that are hard to say, not because you don't know what you mean, but because you've spent long enough alone that the words for them have gotten stiff, like a joint that hasn't been worked in years." I sat with that for a moment. "I'd ask you to stay," I said. "If you wanted to, as my wife, if you wanted to. I have enough land and enough to eat, and the place is decent, and I know I'm not young and I'm not easy, and you have your own ideas about things, which I don't mind at all. But I'd ask you, if you wanted to say yes." She looked at me the way she'd looked at me on the porch that first night. That same clear, direct look that didn't need anything from me. "You're asking," she said, "not telling." "Yes." "And if I say no, you'll help me find something in the spring." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow came down steady. "I know what you did," she said. "With Darman both times and the night with Cask and Hollies." She paused. "You didn't have to do any of that." "Yes, I did," I said. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine, there on the table, just laid it there, warm and still, not squeezing, not making a performance of it. Just there. "All right," she said, "yes." We were married in February in Hatchet Creek, by a circuit preacher who came through on his rounds. There were about 6 people there, none of them from my side because I didn't have a side, and 2 or 3 from her family, her youngest sister, a girl of about 9 who looked at me with frank assessment and seemed to decide I would do. Darman had left by then, packed his goods and his ledger books and went somewhere west in January. I don't know where and I don't much care. The 2 men who worked for him dissolved in his wake, as such men tend to when the structure that held them comes apart. Henry Priest sent a note in January that said nothing real, and I burned it. Ada didn't ask what it said. Spring came late that year. The white winter held on until almost May, but it came. We opened the door of the house on the first warm morning, the door with the fixed gap at the bottom, and the air that came in smelled like the creek and like mud and like the grass coming back, and Cass went out onto the porch and lay in a patch of sun, and Ada stood next to me with her shoulder against mine, and we looked out at what there was. 160 acres of mixed grass and creek bottom, 11 cattle more in the spring, 4 horses, a mule named Porter, a root cellar that had carried us through, a wood pile that had been enough. She put her hand in mine, not with any speech about it, just her hand in mine. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was more than I had thought, at 51 years old, I would ever get to hold. The door still has a good fit now. I fixed the frame right in the spring, didn't rush it, took my time, and it seats flush and solid, and the cold doesn't come in under it anymore. I think about those 3 knocks sometimes, in the dark, the particular sound of them, and how a man can live through 51 years of his life and not know that one thing, one unasked for, unreasonable, remarkable thing, is still on its way to him. She knew, I think. She knew before I did. End Phase 1. Tracker update. Story log in tracker. Asterisk twist used. Asterisk C protector and provider pride. Film seed, True Grit 2010. Grit winter determination, a capable person nobody respects, harsh frontier justice. Seed only, never named. Structure asterisk 4 stations. The night, the weeks, the trouble, the settling, plus door motif throughout. Asterisk narrator. Asterisk Callum, former trail hand foreman deputy, 51. Alone on a 160-acre claim, eastern Wyoming/Sweetwater area, spare and certain in speech. Woman asterisk Ada Priest, 18, farmer's daughter, not soft, clear-eyed, carries her own shotgun. Vibe asterisk white winter cold, lamplit spare and still. Setting asterisk Wyoming frontier. 1887. Opening image, asterisk the door/3 knocks. Ending image, her hand in his, the door fixed, the spring air coming. Word count asterisk